I was inspired by Ellis Jacobs. I was a little boy, and I remember going to his funeral at Radford Grove Church. I was a little bitty boy, and I remember all the flags and all the police officers and everything. And I was asking my mom, I said, Mom, what's going on with all? He said he was a police officer, and this is what they do at funerals. That inspired me. I said, one day, I want to be a police officer. So, you know, as time goes on, David Ramsey, I'm about 24, 25 years old. I saw David in town. He said, come on, get in my car. David working. He got me in the car and took me with the old police department and set me in front of Terry Hill. 3 weeks later, I was in the academy. But what inspired me to be an investigator? The courthouse, where we took pictures at, that was the jail, that was the sheriff department. When we walk in, there was desks, there was Cynthia sitting there, and then there was this guy. I mean, raising hell all in this other guy's face. And I never forget, he was like this on this guy. I mean, he was giving him all of it. I can't remember who I asked, but I want to say Cynthia. And I said, Cynthia, who was that? That's Ernest Poole. I said, what he do? He an investigator. And I never remember, he had a flapjack in the back of his pants in his pocket. I mean, he was giving that guy and that inspired me to be an investigator. I said, I want to be just like this man here. I mean, I knew. I said, so from then on, me and Ernest Poole built a relationship. And since 95, I've been an investigator. Probably the longest, I believe I ain't got JC beat. I probably was the long tenured investigator here in Pershing County. I was an investigator here for 17, 18 years. So all I did was investigate. Now I'm in Vance County, and all I investigate is homicides. But if we got our badges, I mean, these guys mean the world to me. If these badges could talk, oh my goodness. Don't shake your head, so if these badges could talk.
Yeah, was so
we could write a book. Come on, Ernest Poole. We could write a book. But look how far we've gone. We really ain't went nowhere. How long you been retired, Poole?
98.
Cynthia, how long you been retired?
6 years this year.
Have y'all seen a black female deputy?
Ain't seen black any kind.
So we ain't been that far. Hey, my name is Keith Daye. I'm here, born and raised here in Pershing County. I was law enforcement starting in 1992. Started here with the Roxborough Police Department. And what inspired me to get into law enforcement, you know, I was a very young child when my cousin, Alex Jacob, was a police officer here in Roxborough. I didn't recall any time he was here on the force, but unfortunately I remember his funeral. And I saw all the police officers out there in uniforms and, you know, the ceremony that it had for his burial. And, you know, he was like the first officer or anybody that I've seen buried on top of the ground. And, you know, when I used to go out to Radford Grove's church, I always would visit his gravesite. And he inspired me about, you know, my mother telling me information about how he was and how he treated people here. And I said one day that's what I want to do. And I want to get into law enforcement. And when I graduated high school in 1984, I went on to Lewisburg College, and my major was criminal justice. And after I left Lewisburg, I went to Norfolk State, and I still was in criminal justice. So, when I got about 25 years old, I ran into David Ramsey, which he had been encouraging me to get in law enforcement. So I ran into him in one of the parking lots here, and he asked me, he said, you gave any thought what I asked you? I said, yeah, I've been thinking about it. He said, come on, get in my car. So I got in his patrol car because he was working, and he took me to the Roxborough Police Department, and the chief of police at the time was Terry Hill. And 3 weeks later, I was a police officer here in Roxborough. Me and David, I worked for David. He was my lieutenant several years here before I became investigator, where I met Willie Farrish. There wasn't a lot of black law enforcement officers here as my time spent here at the Roxborough Police Department. There probably was probably about 5 police officers at the Roxborough Police Department. But most of the law enforcement officers that I closely worked with was employed by the Sheriff Department. And I became very close to him. And with Cynthia Petty was there, J.C. Bailey, a lot of those guys that, I learned a lot from each one of those to make me who I am today as a law enforcement officer now. And one of the things that inspired me to get into investigations is there was an incident where I had to go to the courthouse. And I was a police officer probably 2 weeks in, and I went into the courthouse, and the sheriff department was located in the courthouse. And I walked in the sheriff department, and I see this gentleman in the face of another guy which was suspected of breaking and entering. And this guy was all in his face. And I asked one of the other officers that was in there, I think Cynthia Petty, I think she was the officer that I asked, and I asked who was this officer all in this guy's face like that, trying to interview him. And she said it was Ernest Poole. And I was like, well, that's who I want to be like. I said, I want to be an investigator. And Ernest Poole, we worked on so many cases together, and he taught me a lot. He is the first investigator that I worked closely with. Ernest Poole could get a report. He could be sitting in his office and get a report and could tell you actually who did the crime without even going out there doing it. He'd call a name right there as to who committed this crime. And sure enough, he would be right.
My name is Ernest Poole. I was the chief investigator for the sheriff department. I was retired as a lieutenant. I started in 1983 as a courtroom bailiff, and after being a courtroom bailiff, I was applied for and received a full-time position as a deputy sheriff under Sheriff Ernest Dixon.
Lieutenant David Ramsey, 31 and a half years. I worked 5.5 years as part-time, 25 years full-time. I wanted to help our people, meaning I wanted to show a difference for our young folk in the black community, and that was why I went into law enforcement to help. When I started in law enforcement, it was so many things that we couldn't do, but as time went on, we was able to do because we just laws kept changing, we just kept being present. So it was a lot of things that when we first went into law enforcement that we couldn't do. But by being there, it changed things. So that's one reason I was glad I got in law enforcement. It changed a lot of the laws.
I am J.C. Bailey, Lieutenant, 30 years of service with Preston County Sheriff's Department. A senior deputy, Radford Ramsey, came to me on my other job at that time. I was a barber, and I was cutting his hair, and he asked me about, they was having a position opening with the Sheriff's Department, would I be interested? And I applied and went to BLAT school, liked what I'd done, and ended up working and stayed there, like I said, my entire time. I started out with the Sheriff's Department for 3 years in uniform, and for 26 years I was in investigations. My experiences back in that day was that you had to talk to people, and you had to get along with the people that you talked to. And my philosophy during my time of working, when I was working with people, I always looked at it that everybody was somebody's child. And I took that with me all the way through my career, and it really worked out for me.
My father-in-law, he was the first black deputy in Person County, Mr. Radford Thomas Ramsey, better known as Doc Ramsey. He was the influence in my life. When we were growing up, you know, young boys, you run around and playing, and one day we were at some neighbor's house, and they drove a school bus, and somebody broke the window in the school bus, and of course somebody had to pay for that. And of course nobody was speaking up. The window was broke by when we got there, so of course I didn't know who did it, but Mr. Ramsey, he came around and asked all of the young guys that were there that day. And the way he talked, it was so calming. I mean, he didn't come off as this tough, better than you are, you know, you're gonna go to jail if you don't do right. His conversation was so down to earth. I mean, he you know, made you feel comfortable. And he had, of course, the uniform he had on. You know how uniforms bring brothers out anyway. And I said, man, he's sharp, and he is sharp. And so I said, when I grow up, I want to pursue that. And of course, in the military, I was a security police officer in the military, so I had a background in it. I started out as a communication officer in 1981, and I became a police officer midway around the middle of 1981, and until 1983, I was in Roxborough. Then I transferred to Butner Public Safety, where I was there until I had an accident. And then I went into the school system for a few years, but my roots always was in law enforcement. So, and the opportunity came, and I became a magistrate. I saw black officers overlooked. I did see that. When I was a police officer, I had the opportunity to work with David Ramsey and J.C. Bailey, and of course my father-in-law, he still was on the force at the time. And some of the lessons that they taught me, you know, of how to be a police officer. They told me how to go out on calls and what to do. I can remember this one time, we got a 1041 call. Of course, that's a fight call. And you know, when you go into when you hear a fight call, you know, the adrenaline start pumping, and you want to hurry up and get there to stop it. And one day, I just happened for some reason to be with my father-in-law, and the call came out, and I said, we get there quicker if we go this way. He looked at me, he said, okay, and he kept talking and went the long way around. And when we drove up there, he said, don't forget this. He said, when you get a fight call, don't be so anxious to get there. He said, always take your time when you get there, because if you take your time to get there, by the time you get there, whoever's fighting, they so tired, they want somebody to break it up. So by the time you get there, they won't want to fight you. They'll be glad to see you. So it's lessons like that they were able to teach, and I learned.
I met Donnell through the church. He was a member of my church. I grew up in the same church that he grew up in. actually is 10 years older than I am. And we had a couple things in common. I knew April 15th was his birthday, and of course that was tax day. He was born in 1935, I was born in 45. It's just been known. I knew Donnell practically all my life. And then he was the first black officer at Roxborough PD. Before then, he was a janitor down at the North End Elementary School, and he went from there to the police department. And because I actually went to work in 1968 part time. That's when during the end of the rides that we had here, a little ride and stuff we had. And I worked as part-time police officer until 1975. And that was when Alec Jacob passed. And I replaced Alexander Jacobs. He was the second. Yeah, he was the second black police officer in Roxborough. At that time, I think Doc had been hired for the sheriff department. So, but Alexander was hired for the police department. He and Donnell were the two first black police officers. And I think Alec was, I don't know the year he was hired. Alexander was there, I know when the riots had all started. And after he passed in 1975, then I became full-time. I think Willie Farrish was there, and it hadn't been long started when I started. And Donnell was, well, like I said, we was in the church together, and because we sung in the male chorus together, and we just basically we joined the lodge. I joined the lodge, and they were in the lodge. There's a lot of things that we did personally in the sportsman club. We were in that together. Baseball games, and stuff like that. Because he and his cousin Bryce, they coached the baseball teams, and that we had Allensville baseball. I mean, stuff like that. And in the community, hunted together. So it was a lot of things that we actually did together. As you know, as friends, like I said, I knew him all my life. He was the first black to retire from the police department, I think. Well, yeah, he was, and he came up through the ranks. He was, I think he was already a sergeant when I got hired at full time. And then he got promoted to lieutenant, and then from lieutenant to captain, and he became the assistant chief. That was the position that he held when he retired, was the assistant chief of police at the police department, and that rank at that time was captain. A whole lot more that can be told about Donnell. I mean, because I don't want to get into he'd be in the only somebody he could arrest at the time was black people. He couldn't, when he first went on, he couldn't arrest white people. But that's a horse of another day. Yeah. But yeah, that's a lot of people already know, but a lot of young people don't know that. But yeah, he was hired as the first black police officer, and I'm glad it was, because that opened the door for me. Yeah.
Well, I started in March of 1971, as Lee Graves was the sheriff then, and that's the way it stayed until somebody else quit. Then I get a car, but it was several years before I could get a car, because everybody couldn't have a car back then. Then I worked when Lee Graves anymore. And I made, I didn't get chief deputy, but I was in charge of all the people that were serving papers in uniform. Back then, he didn't have no chief deputy because he couldn't put who he wanted in there. And I worked under him, and then Dennis Oakley got to be sheriff. He promised me chief deputy. And when he won and when he went in office, he made me chief deputy. And I worked on after 1998, I think that's when I retired from sheriff office, 1998. And the job was, I enjoyed the job. And most of it was what you made it. Back then, you gave respect, you got some respect. It was, couldn't get, everybody didn't respect it, but most people did. But working in law enforcement, it's times you wish you were somewhere else, but you do your job and treat people like you want to be treated. You didn't have a, it wasn't that bad. It was just some people that you is not going to respect you no way. But when you deal with them, you just do what you need to do and let it go. I ran for sheriff twice, and I come in second place both times, and that wasn't what I was looking for, and I didn't try it no more. But I ran because I wanted the job, and I was interested. I wanted to make things better. I don't know what I could accomplish a whole lot, not to, but you got to have help to accomplish what you want done. You just can't get it done, do it by yourself. And you're the sheriff, treat your workers, your people right, respect them. Most of them will respect you. Love dealing with people, because my whole life, that's all every job I ever had was dealing with the public. And before I went to sheriff office, I was working with schools, with the county, and school buses and all. And then when I went to the sheriff office, that was my same thing. And that's what I had in mind of doing if I could have got it. But I wanted a job because I love dealing with people, and that's all I ever done my whole life.
I was close with Alonzo Lunsford, Mac Lunsford before, but I never worked with those guys. Retired before I came in. Like I said before, David Ramsey, Willie Farrish were here during the time I started. Also, one of the black officers that worked probation, James Yancey, which became the first black chief of probation here. You know, James and I was members of civic groups and so forth, and we worked within law enforcement. Of course, he was probation. And I learned a lot from James Yancey. There was a female officer, the first black female officer here, Miss Lillian McGhee. She left actually before I started too, but you know, I was friends with the family and her even before, and she left and went to work at the Fidelity Bank. But you know, that's one thing Person County hasn't, I'm not sure what the problem is about black females, but it is something we've never really had here. We've had some when I worked here at the police department, but the only black female as a deputy I ever known that actually worked the street was Cynthia Petty, which Cynthia and I became very close, me working with the police department. Cynthia taught me a lot. She was kind of the wise lady of law enforcement, so I learned a lot from Cynthia. Birch Avenue. My address over there was 318 Orange Street. I'll never forget it. And my brothers and sisters, which I have one sister, and 4 brothers. And it was hard for us over there. And we had a close-knit mama and dad that loved us and raised us up right, knew right from wrong. But it was hard in Birch Avenue to stay out of trouble. We had choices where we could have made bad choices. But with our upbringing, we were fortunate enough to make the right decisions. So we remained over there till I probably was in junior high school, where we moved to Hill Street. Where on Hill Street, we stayed there probably a year or so, and our house caught a fire, and we lost everything. And that's when I was like a 9th grader at Northern Middle School. When we went back up to the house, there was a deputy up there, which I thought was Herman Green, was up at the house because they had roped the street off where we couldn't get close to it, and like I said, we lost everything. But the community, I can remember the community rallying around us, and we having a place to live, and even though we moved several spots after that, but we finally settled down in the Longhurst community on Providence Road, where I remained there until I graduated high school. After receiving a scholarship at Lewisburg College, baseball scholarship, I played there for 2 years, and I was offered another scholarship from Norfolk State University, HBCU school in Norfolk, Virginia. I played there 2 years until I found the love of my life, which carried me away from school. So I left school and got married in '89. I left school in January of '89. In May of '89, I was married. So at that time, I had to go to work. And I took a couple of jobs, worked at CNA, eventually went to Newton Instrument in Butner. I said to myself, it's time for me for a career, to look into my career, which at that time I had bumped into David Ramsey a couple of times. So, I had put off, law enforcement for a while, but that day David Ramsey told me to get in his car, and he brought me up there to the sheriff department. I always thought that was meant to be. So that's the day I started my law enforcement career. In my early days, I started out as a patrol officer with the Roxborough Police Department, and my mindset at the time was one to always treat people fairly. I didn't mind giving a man a chance, but when I started here back in 1992 as a patrol officer, it was the epidemic of cocaine, crack coming into Person County. And the officials here, the leaders here, would not admit that we had a cocaine problem. And I would tell my lieutenant, I would tell some of the guys that had a little clout up there, hey man, we got a problem here in the streets, because I would ride to my neighborhoods, and they had changed, and the people had changed. And found out some of the changes contributed to cocaine. So when people finally got the notion that, yeah, we might have a problem with drugs, at that point, we done lost the war on drugs because it was too late. So here we are, even up to today. And one of my things coming back to Person County is I want to stop another epidemic that I am experiencing with down where I'm working now in Vance County, heroin. People have named where I work at, Vance County, as the ground to obtain heroin. The pipeline to heroin. And I compare it to cocaine to Person County back in '92 when I started. Nobody wanted to say we had a problem with it. But this heroin epidemic is a whole different animal. And it touches not only white people, it is touching the black people. A lot cheaper drug as cocaine. You know, in Henderson, you can't even find a crack dealer anymore. Everybody's turning to heroin. It's a big money maker, it's cheap, it's a longer high, and it's very easily concealed. And you know, me still living here in Person County, I've heard it's starting to seep in here. Not a lot of incidents, not a lot of arrests with heroin, but it is a very addictive drug. We probably experience 8 overdoses a week with heroin. You can drive up on a lot, see somebody you think might sleep, they high up on the steering wheel. I've heard in the last couple of weeks that Person County has experienced some overdoses of heroin, but that's just a start. And we want to, you know, get our officers here to not only recognize it, because, you know, everybody that does drugs don't deserve jail. It's a form of mental illness too, in which that should be treated, because this heroin is a different element, and I want to address it before it gets out of hand, before we lose the war like we lost it with cocaine. And in order to get a hand on here, to get ahead of this game, we got to hire more black officers here to combat this problem. We want the department, in particular the sheriff department, to look like our community, because in my experience in law enforcement, you know, the black community is not going to talk to everybody. So, you know, when I left here in 1990, actually 2013, I went on to Warren County Sheriff Department, and now I'm with Vance County Sheriff Department, which, you know, there's a well-versed culture there of black law enforcement officers. Unlike, you know, I wasn't used to it, that type of environment coming from Person County, but I didn't know a lot of, after I left here, not familiar with a lot of black law enforcement officers here, but there was a lot of black women and men that come up to me and wanted to get into law enforcement here. And of course, I encouraged them to, you know, go apply here locally, to remain here locally. You know, we've had, you know, the Ernest Pooles, the J.C. Bates, the Herman Greens, which in that era we were heading in the right direction. And I would say in the last 16 years that we have gone backwards. I mean, we ain't at a standstill, we all going backwards. And I'm kind of disappointed at Person County. The number of black police officers hired and the black police officers promoted. I don't know any black police officers that here in Person County that worked for the Person County Sheriff Department that has been promoted. And we as Person County allowed this to happen. To say ain't no officers qualified or none come forward, we're not gonna believe that. We're not gonna even go that route anymore, because I know there's great police officers out there that's of color, not only black, but Hispanics, that are eager to get in law enforcement, but just to be turned away. So it takes, even if you don't, if your excuse is, no, we don't have any qualified or they don't apply, so your job is to go out and recruit these black officers, because there's academies going all around Person County, in Henderson, Durham, you know, all you got to do is go out and give these and show these men and women a lucrative package and veer them here to Person County.
We had 12 deputies. 5 of us were black, 7 whites. Presently, we've got approximately 80 deputies, and only 3 of them was black. In 16 years, the present sheriff has only hired 3 black deputies. That's a reduction of 2 since 1983. When a black deputy retired, he replaced him with a white deputy. That's a systematic elimination of blacks from the Person County Sheriff Department. This gotta change. It's gotta change.
We just need some more black people involved in law enforcement. And we need some more deputies and police officers, black, hired in these departments that's representing Person County.
My entire career, I have witnessed over policing. And when I say over policing, I mean police officers targeting certain people, communities. I had to sit back and watch these things for over my 30-year career, and me not be in a position to do anything about it. You know, I can go and voice my opinion, talk to that officer, hey man, that ain't right, which has hurt me so dearly. You know, it's not no secret what law enforcement is going through as a country, you know, as a state, as a county. And you know, I've been a law enforcement officer here and also and still a citizen here. And I've witnessed some things that I've just not been happy of. And then, like I said earlier, the targeting, the over-policing, you know, driving while black, getting stopped for no reason. These are the things that I want to change. And all these things cause division here in Person County. And you know, I don't claim to be this, you know, person that saved Person County. But what I've seen over the years that, you know, we ain't came that far. I mean, as a matter of fact, I think Person County is going backwards. What we need is, you know, our black communities to come together with these white communities, these white groups, these, you know, white and black churches to come together, because law enforcement can be the unifying force of all of Person County. We touch everybody. Law enforcement touches schools. They touch civil process. We touch law enforcement touch everything. So I think one of the biggest things, and what I would like to see, is law enforcement. But first, we got to look like the community. And I look back at the J.C. Baileys, the Ernest Pooles, the Alec Jacobs, the Lillian McGhees, Cliff Brown, McDonald Lunsford. So many of these guys, and I'm sure I missed some, but I took a piece out of all those guys, and they made me what I am today. And I felt that they gave me the torch to run on in the black community. And I want to, you know, every black or people of color that's interested in this particular field, you know, I encourage them. I not only encourage them, I try to put them on the path of law enforcement, because it is very important that we are diverse here in Person County. So being that our forefathers, these guys that I just mentioned, you know, laid the pathway for us. So we want to continue that pathway. And, you know, it doesn't end with me. You know, we got a few, not many, that's still here in law enforcement here in Person County, and we want to build on that so they can carry the torch, because I got to pass my torch one day.